I believe that the suggestion was probably planted in the kid's mind because the only thing that the father had was bits and pieces of stuff that looked like tinfoil from cigarette packs and balsa I-beams, although they weren't balsa, it was some kind of metal, but they were very light. Next slide. In this letter, he recounts that he saw the pieces and it wasn't the remains of any kind of aircraft that he knew of and that he thought it was a flying saucer. Next slide. This is the results of an interview from Jesse Marcel himself, the father. The father goes through and he makes several interesting points. He said that he was familiar with all air activities, and it was not a weather balloon, nor an aircraft, nor a missile. It was something else, and we didn't know what it was. There were just fragments strewn all over the area, about 3/4 of a mile long and several hundred feet wide. We proceeded to pick up the parts of whatever it was and load it in the vehicles. It was one thing obvious to me, that whatever it probably exploded above the ground and was strewn over the ground, traveling in a easterly direction, probably northeast to southwest. We filled the vehicles and then proceeded to come back home to Walker Air Force Base, which is now called, or was then called, Roswell Army Air Force Base, where I was stationed, and that's how it was. Now notice that Jesse Marcel, the father, doesn't say that that was a flying saucer. He just says he didn't know what it was. And that's significant, and it's never been pointed out before. Everybody cites this letter as proof that he picked up pieces of a flying saucer, and that's a lie. He doesn't say that anywhere in this interview. Next page, please. And he goes on here, and he talks about the metal and the pieces and what it did. He said they tried to burn it, could not be burned. Would not burn. The same with the parchment we had. The metal was so thin, just like the tinfoil in a pack of cigarette paper. I didn't pay too much attention to that at first until one of the boys came to me and said, you know that metal that was in there? I tried to bend that stuff and it won't bend. I even tried it with a sledgehammer. You can't make a dent on it. And he talks about some other things that they did. But nowhere in here is significant. Does he ever say that it was a flying saucer or an extraterrestrial craft? He just says he doesn't know what it was. Next slide, please. And even here, he doesn't say or venture any guess as to what it was. Next slide. This is a letter. This is called the Smith Memo. Smith was a radio engineer for the government of Canada. He came down to Washington to see if he could get the United States government to participate in electromagnetic experiments and experiments involving radio waves and other things of that nature. While he was there, he read a book written by Frank Scully called Behind the Flying Saucers, and he wanted to know if it was real. Scully in his book had said that the government had recovered crashed flying saucers and was hiding this from the public. He went to his embassy, the Canadian embassy in Washington, asked them to find out the truth. The Canadian embassy contacted Dr. Robert Sarbacher, who was a senior scientist working for the Pentagon at that time. And if you'll give me the next slide, this is what Dr. Sarbacher told the Canadian embassy, and they relayed it to Wilbur Smith. A, the matter is the most highly classified subject in the United States government, rating higher than even the H-bomb. B, flying saucers exist. C, their modus operandi is unknown, but concentrated effort is being made by a small group headed by Dr. Vannevar Bush. D, the entire matter is considered by the United States authorities to be of tremendous significance. Again, no mention of extraterrestrial or alien beings. And as you're going to see later, yes, flying saucers did exist. Next slide, please. This is the rest of the Smith memo. It's important that you see the signature and the official stamps and the classifications that were on this thing. It is now declassified. Next slide. At the same time that the government was denying that they were interested in flying saucers or that flying saucers were real or that they were investigating or anything, this poster was on the bulletin boards of Air Force bases everywhere. I remember seeing this for many years on bulletin boards where my father worked. And it says, the first thing up there, UFO serious business, and outlines the fact that every base must have an officer designated to specifically investigate UFOs and report the evidence. And down here it tells him what he has to have. And one of the things is a Geiger counter, a magnifying glass. I don't know what he's going to do with that. And have a source or containers in which to store samples. Camera, binoculars, and other things. Next slide, please. This is a news release. At the same time that poster was on the bulletin boards at Air Force bases, the Air Force was issuing news releases saying that we're not investigating flying saucers, there are no such thing, what you're seeing is weather balloons, and we don't even want to know about it. Next slide. And next, that's the last of it. One of the things they did, though, that last one, I should have held it there, but that's okay. They said that, it's possible it could be a foreign country experimenting with some weird aircraft flying over our airspace, but of course, they couldn't possibly be doing that. Next. At the same time, this poster was also on military bases, and one was the winner of Poster of the Month. Next slide. These are cows. But I wanted to show you what they look like in case some of you haven't been out of the city in a while. Next slide. In some cities that I go to, there's really a reason for doing that. I wanted to show you this. There's something happening with this phenomenon that is absolutely incredible. Everywhere on this slide where you see an M, there has been a classic case of cattle mutilation. I'm going to describe to you what a classic case of cattle mutilation is so that you will know in your mind what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the lips on one side of the face gone. The jaw, the flesh, and the muscle on the lower side of one of the jaw, lower jaw, gone, stripped to the bone. The tongue missing, one eye missing, one ear cored out and missing. Usually a 6-inch diameter patch of skin somewhere on the animal has been cut out. If it's a cow, either the entire udder or a portion of the udder is missing. The rectum is cored out in a perfect cone shape. These sexual organs are always missing. If the cow is pregnant, sometimes the fetus of the calf is gone, but the fetal bag is not opened or cut and has not been invaded in any manner. Now that's incredible. But the most significant thing is that all the blood is drained from the animal's body with no vascular collapse, and there is not a drop of blood anywhere. There are no cigarette butts on the ground, there are no tire tracks, there are no shoe prints, there are no footprints, there are no gum wrappers, there is nothing. The government says that coyotes did that. Now, I'm not going to pretend that I know who or what it was, but I do know one thing, it wasn't coyotes. And I also know that our medical personnel, with the best surgical tools at their disposal, cannot make or duplicate the same cuts that are bloodless, that seem to be literally between the cells. There is no blood in any of the wounds. There are always 2 holes in the neck of the animal. Now, we got very curious about why would these specific parts of the animals be missing? And we came up with some things that are very interesting. Dust collects in the ear. Things that float around in the atmosphere collect in the ear. The lips touch the grass and the earth, so does the lower jaw. The eyes exposed to the atmosphere. The rectum is where most of the heavy impurities, the things that cannot be digested, that are poison to the system,